Okay, so this is worksheet number 2, the charts that shows the digestive juices. Something to keep in mind is the site of synthesis, as we were talking about. Synthesis means creating in like Latin. The site of synthesis is where these hormones and enzymes, where they are produced. So even though this chart specifically is everything that happens in the stomach, the site of synthesis comes from different cells within the stomach. So that was actually a good thing to bring up, Shannon. Thank you for that. Good thing to point out. So the first enzyme we're going to start out with is pepsinogen. And pepsinogen is an inactive enzyme secreted from chief cells. So whenever you see the word ogen, I think of at least Genesis, which means the beginning. This cell is inactive. So it's just existing. So whenever you see something pepsinogen or trypsinogen, ogen means inactive. Yeah. Yeah, until it's stimulated. But combined with another enzyme too. So as you can see, pepsinogen is secreted from the chief cells, and it's in an active form of pepsin. Pepsinogen, so when you have your stomach, let's make sure I'm getting this. Okay. So when you have your stomach, right? That's lovely. There's no food in there, right? So your pepsinogen will just be hanging out. We don't want active pepsin in our stomach without any food because it will eat our stomach, and we don't want that. So it's inactive, and that's great because that works out for us. But pepsin is the enzyme that is active. So we're going to skip down here to HCl, hydrochloric acid. Secretory category, the category of HCl is an acid. It is secreted by parietal cells, and it turns, as you can see, pepsinogen into pepsin. So you have pepsinogen, and then your HCl, your hydrochloric acid will then fill up because, right, you eat a piece of, since this is green, we're going to eat some broccoli. Woohoo. Yeah. That looks kind of like a tropical beach. A piece of broccoli is a palm tree. And hydrochloric acid ocean. Oh, wow. All right. So your hydrochloric acid will stimulate pepsinogen to turn into pepsin. And pepsin, this is broccoli, but pepsin is really important to digest proteins. So pretend that's a protein broccoli. I don't know. So proteins can then be, if you look in this chart, so the second line, pepsin. Pepsin is a secretion. It is an enzyme. It was pepsinogen, but then it was activated by hydrochloric acid. And it turns proteins into polypeptides because proteins are big and polypeptides are smaller. And the smaller we make something, the more surface area it'll have, right? So if you have this versus these, this is all the surface area you're ever going to get, while with these you have lots more surface area. So that's what pepsin does to protein. Gastric lipase, it is an enzyme. It is secreted by chief cells, and it aids in butterfat digestion. So lipase, ACE, being an enzyme that digests lipids. Right? Because whenever you see the end of a word says ASE, ACE, it's an enzyme. So let that kind of help. Sometimes. I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule, like pepsin. It's just pepsin, not pepsinase or something. Yeah, they just do this to mess with us. So, that is gastric lipase. Mucus, which we all love. Mucus is categorized as mucus. It is secreted by mucus cells, and it protects the stomach, and it lubricates everything. So that's nice. We like our mucus. Actually, my stomach's up here. The next secretion is intrinsic factor. An intrinsic factor is a glycoprotein. She probably won't ask you for glycoproteins, but this is just so it makes sense. It's not an enzyme and it's not an acid. It's something different, but it's just a substance. Intrinsic factor is produced by parietal cells or secreted by parietal cells, and it helps with the absorption of vitamin B12 in small intestines. So what is vitamin B12? Why is that important? So if you have vitamin B12 deficiency, it affects your red blood cells, and you have, what do you call it? It's some form of anemia. Yeah. So intrinsic factor, people who have issues with their stomachs, like they get like a gastric bypass, or their stomach just doesn't secrete intrinsic factor, they're going to have anemia. Pernicious anemia, that's what it's called. Pernicious anemia. So that's just a little fun fact. When you learn about blood, thing about B12, very important for blood. So even more mucus in the stomach, right, to balance the gastric acid. So mucus, it is categorized as mucus, and it is secreted by goblet cells. So goblet cells is a site of synthesis. That's where mucus comes from. And mucus is an alkaline coating for the stomach. It protects the stomach from stomach acid and is found near openings of gastric pits. And I believe when you were in lab, Janet showed, or she will show you, what the gastric pits are and everything. So
are goblet cells basically the same as mucosal cells or mucus cells?
they look different, but they do the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just have both, but they both produce mucus. So yep. So that is everything in the stomach. It's pretty straightforward, right? Now we get to the pancreas. So in the stomach, as you can tell, was very simple because the stomach basically only broke down the lipase from gastric lipase. It only broke down lipids, and it only broke down proteins, right? But your pancreas is very important to break down everything else. So your pancreas, because it's breaking down so much more substances in your body, like your fats, and your fats is from bile, but like your carbohydrates and your proteins are going to be broken down even further. Your pancreas is going to secrete a lot more things. So it is quite a thrill. So this is your pancreas. And this is your small intestine. And I made this really big for a reason. I'd be very worried if someone's small intestine was this size. So this is all your small intestine. So okay, lovely. All right, so your pancreas will secrete pancreatic amylase, and ACE is an enzyme. Amylase, right? We had salivary amylase earlier. We went over that, and that digests starch and glycogen, and it breaks those things down into disaccharides, which are smaller forms. So you have like a big potato. Potato gets broken down even further. So the starchy potato gets broken down into disaccharides, which will eventually get broken down into glucose over time. But you have to take it apart a little bit at a time. Your pancreatic lipid. Oh, and everything your pancreas secretes goes to the small intestine. So when your pancreas, when I say it's secreting and it's breaking things down, it is going into the small intestine, and everything that's being broken down is happening in the small intestine. Does that make sense? So your pancreas will secrete everything. Your pancreas doesn't like break stuff down within it because it's an accessory organ. Food is actually in here. Food. So your pancreatic lipase is an enzyme, cytosynthesis in the pancreas, not very specific, and it breaks down triglycerides into monoglycerides and fatty acids. So triglycerides tend to be a big molecule. Monoglycerides and fatty acids are smaller. So I'm going to pull up a picture really fast to show you what a triglyceride looks like. And you don't have to know this for an exam, but it's just helpful to kind of see what I'm talking about. Here we go, that's a nice one. So in Latin, tri means three, right? Triglyceride. So this is a glycerol molecule right there. You don't need to memorize this, but this is glycerol. Triglyceride means that there's 3 fatty acid chains, so 1, 2, 3. So what pancreatic lipase does is it takes the fatty acids, it basically detaches this molecule. So, and it says that it breaks down triglycerides into monoglycerides and fatty acids. So by that, you break this all apart, you have monoglyceride, right? Because 1, 2, 3 makes it tri. Mono means 1. So when you break this apart, you have 1 of these and 3 of these all separated. So it breaks down to monoglyceride and fatty acids. But together they're triglyceride. Does that make sense? Okay, I don't know if that helped. But did? Good. The next thing that your pancreas secretes is nucleases. Nuclease. This is an enzyme that is synthesized in the pancreas. Again, goes from the pancreas to the small intestine, and it digests nucleic acids. And nucleic acids are like your DNA, but that can be found in meat because your meat has, I guess the animals have DNA too. So, or anything really has DNA. But next portion, we're gonna skip these really fast, and we're gonna come back to them soon. Bicarbonate ion is a buffer. A buffer is something that makes something less acidic. So buffers are nice for that matter. So that's what bicarbonate ions do. They're a buffer secreted by the pancreas, and these make pancreatic juice more alkaline, which buffer stomach acid. So when food enters the small intestine from the stomach, it's very acidic, right? And that kind of burns. We don't like the burning. Yeah, the pancreatic juice, the bicarbonate ions neutralize it. That's a good way to go about it. So that's what bicarbonate does. Somatostatin, this bottom one, I believe, that concludes pancreatic stuff until we get back up here. Somatostatin is a hormone secreted by the pancreas, and this inhibits secretion of acid. So, like I said, you eat food, your stomach becomes full of gastric acid. We stop eating because our stomach is full, and then it empties into the intestine, right? It kind of does it at the same time, but we're just going to do it step by step. So when acid starts entering the intestine, your intestine knows that your stomach is empty and it's not doing anything else. So it says, stop secreting acid. That's what somatostatin does. And since this is a hormone, you guys just got done with hormones, what is somatostatin also known as? Growth hormone, inhibiting hormone, yep. So I don't think Janet will throw that at you, but hopefully not, no. So, I mean, that's some pancreatic stuff. Now we're going to move on to these 4. Trypsinogen, chemotrypsinogen, proelastase, and procarboxypeptidase. So your pancreas secretes all of these into the small intestine. Where is it? Here's my blue. So like I said, trypsinogen is an inactive enzyme secreted by the pancreas. So whenever you see the word ogen, it means it's inactive. And why would we want something to be inactive in the pancreas? So it doesn't eat it. And what were you saying? too strong, too intense. Let's go camping, right? No, I'm kidding. Okay, so that didn't make sense. Yeah, so you have your trypsinogen. You then have your chymotrypsinogen. I'm going to abbreviate it. Chymotrypsinogen. You then have your proelastase. And then you have procarboxypeptidase. So procarb. So I kind of abbreviated these. So you might want to start making this if you can. I don't know if you want to. So basically, I'm going to read these definitions, but then I'll draw it out once we move on to intestinal enzymes. So your trypsinogen. Once activated by enterokinase, it becomes trypsin. Trypsin will then activate chymotrypsinogen, proelastase, and procarboxypeptidase. So it will activate all those. So that's what trypsin does when it becomes trypsin, but these are just normal now. Chymotrypsinogen, once activated by trypsin, so chymotrypsinogen is activated by trypsin, it becomes chymotrypsin. Chymotrypsin then digests proteins. Once activated by trypsin, proelastase becomes elastase. Elastase then digests proteins. Procarboxypeptidase. Once activated by trypsin, it becomes carboxypeptidase, which then digests proteins. So these will all digest proteins at some point in time. And these will all turn into things. So after running through those, this is your intestine. Entero. So all of these pancreatic enzymes will come into the small intestine. It will then be activated once it gets into the small intestine because they're too strong for the pancreas. So enterokinase will activate trypsinogen. Trypsinogen will turn into trypsin. Trypsin will then act on all three, chymotrypsinogen, proelastase, and procarboxypeptidase. And it will turn them into, it will activate them. And when they are activated, they're called something different, which is what we just ran through, right? So chymotrypsinogen turns into chymotrypsin. Proelastase turns into elastase. And procarboxypeptidase will then turn into just carboxypeptidase. And then these all work to digest proteins. Does that make sense? Okay. So basically, they don't become activated till they come into the intestine because they have to be activated by enterokinase. It's a what? A ripple effect. Yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it. So hopefully reading through that help facilitate learning this. So moving on to intestinal juices. So we have enterokinase, which triggers the pancreatic enzymes to function. Enterokinase, the cytosynthesis is in the microvilli. The definition says, converts trypsinogen into active trypsin. Trypsin then activates other pancreatic proteases. And a protease is an enzyme that digests proteins, right? Because protein and then ase, protein and then enzyme. Ase means enzyme, and they digest proteins. So, let's see, peptidase is an enzyme that breaks down peptides into amino acids. So peptidase is secreted in the intestinal juice, which I don't know if that sounds delightful or not. And then you have sucrase, maltase, and lactase, which are all enzymes secreted by microvilli, and these break down disaccharides into monosaccharides. So before, when we went up here, we had starch and glycogen broken down into, disaccharides, right? Those disaccharides will then be broken down into monosaccharides once it's in this intestine, once it's more along the way. In sucrase enzyme breaks down sucrose, sugar, right? Lactase enzyme breaks down lactose, sugar. And maltase breaks down maltose, sugar. So there's a trend here. Another thing too, lactase, people who are lactose intolerant, they cannot tolerate the lactose sugar. They do not produce lactase. So that's why they get really all bloated, is because they can't digest it. They can't break it down. It's just kind of a nuisance in their intestines. So this will take some time to read over, but this is just something to help organize when you're reading the textbook, something that'll help organize your thoughts. I don't expect you to understand this the first go. This hopefully helps a little bit too. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so another thing secreted by your intestines is lipase. This is an enzyme secreted by microvilli. This breaks down fats into monoglycerides, fatty acids, and glycerol, like we saw, right? I pulled up the molecule of a triglyceride. The next secretion is mucus. This is categorized as mucus. And this cytosynthesis is mucus secreting goblet cells and Brunner glands. So both goblet cells and Brunner glands secrete mucus. What is mucus? A thick alkaline substance to neutralize acidic chyme. So it neutralizes in the small intestine. Okay. Some more. Are we done with that? Okay. Some more intestinal enzymes, and there's about 2 pages of that. So 2 more intestinal stuff, and then we'll be done. Enterocrinin is a hormone. So the rest of these are pretty much hormones. This is secreted by the duodenum, and this releases in response to acidic chyme entering the duodenum. Because like we said, when there's acidic chyme in the duodenum, or the duodenum, however you want to pronounce it, your intestines don't need acid to digest things. It has plenty of pancreatic enzymes inside of it. So enterocrinin also stimulates the secretion of mucus by Brunner glands, and this will cause the acid from the stomach to be neutralized. Secretin is a hormone released in response to acidic chyme. You'll see this as a trend, released in response to acidic chyme, released in response to fats, released in response to proteins. A lot of this stuff is triggered just because of the presence of a certain substance, because that's what it breaks down. CCK, extremely important. I would pay a lot of attention to this. It's a hormone released by the duodenum. It is released in response to chyme with proteins and fats. Causes contractions of the gallbladder, right? Because we have proteins and fats in the small intestine, we need bile. So CCK will go from the small intestine, go up to the gallbladder and say, hey, start secreting bile. CCK also causes the secretion of pancreatic juice and releases pancreatic juice and release into duodenum. It causes pancreatic juice to be released in the duodenum, and it inhibits gastric motility and secretion. So it stops gastric secretion, it stimulates the pancreas to secrete pancreatic enzymes, and it stimulates the gallbladder to secrete bile. That's huge. If you don't have CCK, you're kind of screwed. Yeah, you're in a lot of trouble. This is kind of messed up. Let's get that away. So your intestinal somatostatin again, inhibits acid secreted by the stomach. So you can see that there's a trend in the intestinal substances, intestinal hormones, and enzymes. They pretty much inhibit gastric secretion. Okay. GIP, GIP, gastric inhibitory peptide. Oh, I wonder what this does. It is released in response to chyme entering the duodenum. It inhibits gastric motility and secretion and causes, and this is interesting about GIP, it causes pancreatic islets to secrete insulin. So your body will, just say you eat like a cupcake or something. I don't know. But just say you eat chocolate, right? Let's do that. That's much nicer. So when you eat chocolate, your body doesn't know it until GIP goes. So when chocolate's inside your intestine, GIP will go from your intestine to the pancreas and tell the pancreas to secrete insulin because it's like, hey, there's sugar in the body. You need to start producing insulin. So just know GIP and insulin have a connection. The next one is another hormone. This is VIP, very important person. No, I'm kidding. Vasoactive intestinal peptide. And the name kind of defines the function. So vasoactive. Vaso, you think about veins. This is released in response to chyme entering the duodenum. This dilates local intestinal capillaries. So dilating means that it causes intestinal capillaries to get bigger, right? So like if you can't go swimming after 30 minutes of eating, right? Because all the blood is pooling here inside of your organs, or the blood wants to pool in your intestinal organs. That's because of vasoactive intestinal protein. That causes the pooling of blood. So it causes the dilating of organal capillaries. Intestinal capillaries, there we go. And it also, stimulates intestines to secrete some watery fluid to just kind of pick up nutrients. Because what happens is the water leaves the intestines and then it goes into the blood, it goes back into the intestines, and it kind of like circulates until your body can absorb it. It's really cool. Just take my word for it. The last one is gastrin. This is a hormone secreted by the stomach and the duodenum, and this is the black sheep of hormones and enzymes because it actually stimulates the stomach to do stuff. It's like, hey, you need to start digesting things. So that is gastrin. It's released in response to chyme with undigested proteins. So when you eat and just say your stomach didn't do a good enough job, your gastrin will see that these proteins and things, they're not digested. So it'll tell the stomach, start digesting stuff. What are you doing? Why are we getting into undigested proteins? Like, you're not doing your job. So gastrin is pretty much the only one that stimulates gastric motility. Gastrin secreted by both the stomach and small intestine and has the same effects. So just a little bit of a recap. What does digestive juice digest? Lipids and proteins. Pancreatic juice digests everything else: lipids, carbs, nucleic acids, and proteins. So I like my pancreas very much. My stomach can go elsewhere. I could care less for it. And then the significant function of small intestine secretions. A significant function of small intestine secretions is that small intestines are where hormones become active, right? The small intestine, everything activates and starts functioning. And then this is just a little recap. Difference between a hormone and an enzyme. Probably should have had this first, actually. A hormone is basically chemicals released by glands. These carry messages to other parts of the body, just like in the endocrine system. So hormone, think chemical. Enzyme, biological catalyst released by glands. This speeds up metabolic reactions. So the first one is basically the definition of it. So if you see biological catalyst, it's an enzyme. If you see a chemical, it's typically a hormone. And that's what they do, basically where they go. So an enzyme like this, that would take forever for the stomach to churn all that protein without enzymes inside of it doing its job. It would take forever for the intestines to digest and absorb nutrients if you didn't have enzymes breaking things down. So it speeds up metabolic reactions. It speeds up our ability to break down food and to take food up into our bodies. So it's a little bit of a long shot there. But that concludes it. Do you have any questions? No?
Well, wait,
Yeah.
this one, okay, from the sucrase, maltase, and lactase,
Mm-hmm.
when it breaks down the disaccharides into monosaccharides, is it the disaccharides from, where was it?
From before?
From,
Pancreatic amylase?
okay, that's where it's from?
Yeah, that's where the disaccharides. Because, right, we eat something, so we eat that starchy potato. The starchy potato breaks down into disaccharides with the pancreatic juice. Later on, those disaccharides are broken down by the sucrase, maltase, lactase. You know, does that make sense? Of course, you know, those enzymes do different. They're more specialized. You know, like lactose sugar versus fructose sugar. But the disaccharides are coming from the starch and glycerol that was digested. So, anything else? Good? That was a good one. There you go.
Just now, like, this is just the, like, besides us going over all the hormone stuff now, it's like all the enzymes and hormones.
Yeah, enzymes and.